When I was about 11, I can remember flicking through the newly begotten digital TV stations on my family's TV, which took our viewing options from around 14 channels to around 400. And at some point, I happened upon a TV show that looked, well, different to everything else. It featured a muscular blonde-haired man fighting an androgynous purple alien, when, all of a sudden, shockingly, the purple alien was cut in half by what seemed to be his own energy disk. And to put things in context here, this was about 5 o'clock in the evening on Irish television, and to see such a gruesome act, well, it shocked me, and it also kickstarted my love of shonen battle series. This was also right around the time the internet was becoming readily available in Ireland, and considering no one in my school even knew what anime was, I took to the World Wide Web to find out more about it, and while certainly I found other fans of DBZ online, I was surprised with how much ridicule the show was getting. The characters, the story, the artwork, the pacing. There seemed to be a lot of people online who liked anime, but did not like Dragon Ball Z. But I'm not here today to debate the quality or lack thereof of Dragon Ball Z. Let's leave that conversation for another video. Spoilers, I think it's pretty good. But something that I think gets lost in that conversation is the skill of its creator, Akira Toriyama, as well as how much his series has drastically changed the landscape of anime and manga as a whole. And so, to really explore this, I'd like to go back beyond Dragon Ball Z, before Super Saiyans, before Scouters, and before Power Levels, and first take a look at where it all began, with the original manga. Which, friends, yes, is exactly why we're here today. So what say we kick back, relax, and talk about the genius of Dragon Ball. The reason we're going to be talking about the manga as opposed to the 1980s anime is that I want to highlight how goddamn fantastic Toriyama is at writing a good manga. And we're going to get into exactly why that is, but first, let's take a trip back to the Shonen Jump offices of the early 1980s. I think one thing that's kind of difficult to get your head around now is that in the early days of Shonen Jump, battle manga just didn't really exist, at least not in the sense they do now. The closest thing was probably Fist of the North Star, which has far less in common with the modern definition of battle manga than it would your contemporary seinen action series. And it was around this time that artist Akira Toriyama began working with Shuhei Publishing. He had various short stories published in Shuhei's assorted magazines, such as his Wonder Island collections, and while he had some degree of initial success, it wasn't until 3 years later that he became a weekly author with his first major title, Dr. Slump. And the series was pretty successful, regularly ranking in at around number 2 or 3 in the popularity polls. But Toriyama quickly grew tired of it, claiming that the episodic nature made it uninteresting for him to work on. And so Jump agreed to let Toriyama work on a brand new series, but only if he could come up with something more interesting than Dr. Slump. And so Toriyama and his editor Torishima set about creating a brand new series, spending 5 days a week working on Dr. Slump, and the remaining 2 days on the as yet unnamed project. And for a period of time, despite the pair's talent and previous success, they had a great degree of trouble coming up with anything they thought would make for a popular series. And so Torishima decided they needed to scrap the project and continue with Dr. Slump. But before doing so, he visited Toriyama for one final pitching session, which lasted late into the night. And just as it seemed like nothing of fruition was going to come, Toriyama's wife, serving the pair tea, remarked how she thought it was unusual how her husband would watch old kung fu movies while drawing Dr. Slump. And this was the eureka moment between the two, Torishima figuring if Toriyama liked kung fu movies so much, then Toriyama's next project should be an action martial arts series, and so the seed of Dragon Ball was planted. It kind of blows my mind to think how if Toriyama's wife hadn't brought the pair tea in that one moment, the landscape of modern manga and anime could be drastically different. After running a successful prototype chapter in the form of the one-shot called Dragon Boy, the pair set out in shaping their new series to suit a long-form story. And so it was in 1984's issue 51 of Shonen Jump magazine that the very first chapter of Dragon Ball was published. Early Dragon Ball has this great road trip vibe to it, with Goku and Bulma having to find places to camp, eat, and also getting into the various martial arts based encounters the series would later become so famous for, as they search out the 7 Dragon Balls, which, once gathered, will grant a single wish. The story, at least in the beginning, has a decidedly small scale charm to it, resembling far more Dr. Slump's episodic based comedy than that of the long form storytelling of Dragon Ball Z. And these early chapters are charming as hell, mainly down to how fun it is to watch the different characters bounce off one another. Goku, Bulma, Krillin, Lunch, Master Roshi, all these characters have a particular tone and personality to them. And I think what really sells them is the terrifically expressive artwork. I think Dragon Ball, far more so than his later work, is where you can really see one of Toriyama's strongest aspects, his exceptional character designs. He seems to have an effortless way of working all the fundamentals of good visual language into his illustrations. Each character strikes a clear, readable silhouette, and are all constructed from shapes in a way that play up their core personality traits. Take Goku, for example. I think if you were to break down his character into 3 fundamental parts, you could say he's innocent, energetic, and powerful. Now let's look at the first illustration of him from the first page, and see how Toriyama has represented these 3 different aspects. He has the proportions of a small child, and that goes some way in showing his innocence, but maybe even more so, look at the soft shapes that make up his body. There's no hard right angles, just gentle sloping curves. And curves have the effect on our brain of signaling youth or a lack of danger, as they generally naturally occur in younger creatures like babies, puppies, and kittens. And so a curved line can give off a gentle, more playful feeling than that of a jagged one. And this is a principle that carries across through all design. Even look at how different an effect it has when a room is constructed from curves as opposed to one constructed from harsh angles. Toriyama has used this visual language to signal to us that Goku is at heart a young, innocent child. But he's also offset this aspect of his character by doing just the opposite with his hair, using his disheveled locks to create a wild, jagged pattern, which signals to us that there is an edge and an energy to Goku's personality. Like, okay, this is gonna look a little silly, but just watch how different a vibe he gives off if we take away his spiky hair. See, look at this fucking nerd. And then finally, the power aspect of his character. Some of this comes from his chunky little body, but generally Toriyama is great at showing power and solidity through a character's pose and gesture. Case in point, just look at the wide, stable stance Goku has taken here. Because of how well drawn it is, it means you can feel Goku's weight going down into his feet. His low center of gravity making the little guy feel stable and immovable despite his tiny size. And so, with subtle visual cues like this, we get a character who all at once feels innocent, energetic, and powerful. And you can see this same mastery of visual language in so many of the characters from Dragon Ball. Like, look at how Master Roshi's body is just a giant square, meaning even though he's drawn as an old man, there's still a strength and a solidity to his character design. He also plays off the juxtaposition between characters. For most of Dragon Ball, one of Goku's primary visual factors is how small he is. And again, this makes us subconsciously think of cute things, but also, whenever he faces off against a much larger opponent, it creates this great David versus Goliath aesthetic, making us root for the little guy all the more. This same mastery of visual language extends even into the machinery of Dragon Ball. Generally, machines in most medium are drawn to look very angular, as to express their manufactured nature. But check out how soft and even cute a lot of Toriyama's machine designs are. His deftness with these design elements is what gives Dragon Ball's world such a fun and bouncy feel throughout, and is one of the primary factors in it being such a pleasure to read. There's definitely a conversation to be had about how Toriyama's style evolved into the more angular, rigid look of DBZ, but let's leave that for another day. If you want to see more of his fantastic character work, then look no further than the excellent Dragon Quest series, where Toriyama did all the monster and character designs, or even check out the classic Super Nintendo RPG Chrono Trigger. I especially love the work he's done on the character designs for the main party here, the various divergent timelines they come from, all tied together by Toriyama's terrific artwork. However, while Toriyama's exceptional draftsmanship goes a long way to making his early work so endearing, Simply being a great illustrator is only about halfway to becoming a great comic or manga artist, as you still need to know how to structure a page of a comic and to make the story flow for the reader. Kotaku ran a pretty interesting article on this last year based off a report by the Japanese website Nikaido Renji, which broke down how Toriyama uses a Z pattern and careful placement of each individual visual element to guide the reader's eye, and showed how even a subtle change to the layout, like moving a speech bubble, can completely break the visual flow of a page. But I think where Toriyama takes this concept even further is how he portrays time in each individual panel. This might sound a little weighty, but hear me out here. Let's look at the panel from chapter 36, the fight between Krillin and Bacterian. At first, it might seem like you're looking at a still image, and you are, certainly, but check out what happens when we follow the visual instructions Toriyama has laid out for us. We start here in the top right corner, as one does when reading Japanese manga, and immediately the speed lines take us down the path of Bacterian's punch, which ends with him swiping at air. Then we follow Krillin's speed lines up, concluding on him, letting us know that he has dodged the attack. And while you could look at this image as portraying a single instance in time, really, if we follow the flow of the illustration, what we're actually getting is two events happening in sequence. One, Bacterian's punch, and the second, Krillin's dodge, thus creating a sequential event from a single image. And you can see this same technique at work in so many of Toriyama's panels, even playing around with the sequence of events in order to alter their effect. Structuring it like we see here gives the impression that Krillin dodged Bacterian's punch right at the last second. But check out this panel, where Jackie Chun dodges first and Yamcha's attack follows, giving the subtle feeling that the wily master is several steps ahead of the younger, less skilled fighter. And so, when you take into account Toriyama's draftsmanship that allows him to create such bold, expressive artwork, couple that with his ability to imbue each panel with a sense of timing and movement, and then structure all that within a page layout that just seamlessly flows, what you get is one of the finest technical examples of any manga. As important as the visual component to Dragon Ball is, there's still one other major factor that we have yet to touch on, an aspect that once added, skyrocketed Dragon Ball's popularity to heights from which it never returned. Up until about chapter 28, this has been a relatively simple story about Goku and Bulma looking for Dragon Balls. But then, Goku and his newly begotten rival Krillin begin training under the invincible old turtle hermit, Master Roshi. They have to deliver milk on foot wearing these massive weighted turtle shells, dodge angry hornets while tied to a tree, and swim through vicious shark-infested waters, all with the purpose of training their body and mind so that they can become strong enough to enter the strongest under the heavens world martial arts tournament. And while these chapters are a lot of fun, when you look closely at them, you can see the focus of the story slowly start to shift. These chapters introduced the very simple but absolutely fundamental concept of growth to Dragon Ball's story. This was a mainstay of many sports titles at the time, but had never really been implemented into a series centered around action. Much more common were these straight-up badass characters like Kenshiro, who would generally dominate their opponents with little to no effort. But now we had Goku, a child who was not always strong enough, who occasionally lost fights, someone who would get their ass kicked, but was going to get up the next day in order to train and try again. And hell, I think that's a fantastic thing to write a story about. And a message that deeply resonated with a young Japanese audience, taking Dragon Ball from around rank 6 to 8 in the Shonen Jump popularity polls to a consistent number 1. This concept really is, to me, the spirit of shonen-style storytelling. That it's okay to lose a fight, that it's okay to fail once in a while, because all you really have to do is get up the next day and try again. And do that enough times and you'll eventually get there. You'll become whatever it is you are meant to be. And certainly you could argue that later series took this to ludicrous extremes, and that there are other titles that have taken this concept further and executed on it better. But regardless, I think it's fascinating to go back now and look at where it all began. And to me, this is the genius of Dragon Ball. Friends, I want to thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video and would like to help me create more like it, consider heading over to patreon.com/supereyepatchwolf, where for a single $1, you can become an official member of the Super Eyepatch Wolf Pack, and see your name listed with these fine citizens right here. A huge thank you to friend of the channel Rebecca Reynolds for once again providing the fantastic illustrations for this video. You can find her at Let's Hopscotch on Twitter or check out her Tumblr, link in the description below. A huge source for a lot of this video is a fantastic 2016 Forbes interview with the editor of Dragon Ball, Torishima. I'm going to link it down below, and if you have any interest in battle manga or its history, this is a fascinating read I would highly recommend. I will, of course, be back soon with another video, but in the meantime, you can come hang out at the Let's Fight a Boss video game podcast, or come find me on Twitter at Eyepatchwolf. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.